Picture 10,000 people crammed into a stadium in Toronto on a night that was supposed to be a routine second-round match, and picture an umpire standing there with his hand raised, asking the crowd to settle down, and picture that same request being ignored again and again because nobody in that building had any intention of going quiet, not for a second-round match, not for a 25 seed, not for anyone, except this was not a normal crowd, and this was not a normal player, this was a wall of Philippine flags rippling across the stands and a chair umpire fighting a losing battle against pure noise. And the strange part is that none of this was supposed to happen because exactly 1 year earlier, in that same city, at that same tournament, a 20-year-old ranked 65th in the world named Alex walked out for a first-round match, lost, and went home with barely anyone noticing. No sellout, no flags, no wall of sound, just a quiet exit in a tournament that had 1,000 other storylines to chase. And here is the fact that makes all of this worth sitting with. In the entire history of women's professional tennis, going back over 5 decades, the Philippines, a nation of more than 100 million people, had never once produced a WTA Tour champion, not one. So when tickets for Alex's second-round match this year vanished in half an hour, faster than most people can decide what to order for dinner, something bigger than a tennis match was clearly going on, and to actually understand it, you cannot start in Toronto, you have to rewind all the way to a January night in Australia, when Alex won an entire set without dropping a single game, and somehow still walked off the court a loser. Because that loss, as strange as it sounds, is the real starting point of the story. And to get why that match broke something in her, you first need to understand what she gave up just to be standing on that court at all. She was born in Quezon City back in 2005, and if you know anything about sports culture in the Philippines, you know the hierarchy. Basketball runs so deep it borders on religion. Boxing is treated like a national inheritance passed down through generations. Volleyball dominates the school system, and tennis sits somewhere near the bottom of that list. In a country with no real professional pipeline, no domestic tour worth mentioning, and absolutely no blueprint for what success even looks like. So try to imagine being a 9-year-old girl in Manila who decides that tennis, of all things, is going to be her path. There is no path. She was inventing one from nothing. By 13, she was already on a plane heading to Mallorca completely alone, thousands of miles from her mother's kitchen, several time zones removed from her own bed, headed to train at an academy on a Mediterranean island where she did not even speak the local language, at an age when most kids are worrying about who they're going to sit with at lunch. She was chasing a career her entire country had never once produced, and this was not some family stumbling blindly into that decision either. Her mother had been a competitive swimmer who medaled internationally back in the 80s. Her father worked as a business executive, and her older brother had played college tennis in the United States. This was a household that understood exactly what that sacrifice would cost. They knew how many gifted young athletes from the Philippines get close to something big and then quietly fade away because the funding dries up or the system simply is not there to catch them, and they sent her anyway. And here is something most tennis coverage completely glosses over. There are roughly 10 million Filipinos living outside the Philippines right now, nurses working hospital shifts in Chicago, engineers stationed in Dubai, sailors on cargo ships crossing every ocean on the planet, caregivers in Toronto, families who packed one suitcase in their late teens or early 20s and flew off to a country where nobody knew their name, all so someone back home could have a better shot at life. And when those same people watch a 13-year-old girl fly alone to Spain to chase something her homeland had never accomplished, they are not just watching a sports story unfold, they are watching a mirror of their own lives, the same loneliness, the same late-night video calls, the same crushing weight of an entire family's hopes riding on your shoulders in a foreign place. That is exactly why the flags show up. That is exactly why the stadiums fill up. This was never really only about forehands and backhands, but here is the uncomfortable stretch of the story. For a long time it looked like all of that sacrifice might not be enough. Her talent was obvious early. She was taking sets off top 10 players. She was making headlines. She became a household name back home before she had ever actually won a tournament that counted for anything meaningful. And in professional sport, fame that arrives ahead of results is one of the most dangerous traps an athlete can fall into, because expectations get set at the ceiling immediately, while the actual career still has to grind its way up to meet them. And in January of this year, in front of a country that had stayed up well past midnight just to watch her, Alex found out exactly how brutal that gap could feel. It was her first ever appearance in the main draw at the Australian Open, and back home that meant something enormous. The match was scheduled deep into the Philippine night. Families huddled around single-phone screens. Offices had streaming tabs quietly open in the background. An entire nation set alarms and stayed awake for her. Her opponent was an American named Alicia Parks. A big hitter with a huge serve, and a game that could either blow an opponent off the court or completely fall apart under its own weight. And in the first set, Alex was untouchable. She won it without dropping a single game. And in tennis, when a professional wins a set that lopsided, the match is basically decided in their favor the overwhelming majority of the time. So this was not just a lead. This felt like a statement being written in real time. Back home, people were already celebrating in group chats. And then it all unraveled. Parks clawed back the second set, then took the third. And just like that, the match and the tournament was over. And if you actually sit with those numbers for a second, they sting even more. She won 12 straight games to open that match, and then lost 15 of next 1. Not against some unstoppable top-ranked opponent, but after being completely in control of her own destiny. And that raises the exact question that would follow her around 4 months afterward. How do you keep believing in yourself after proving, over and over, that you can beat absolutely anyone and still somehow not finish the job? A couple of months later at Indian Wells, she ran into a rising Czech player named Linda Noskova, a competitor almost exactly her own age, rising through the ranks on a nearly identical timeline. And the result was not just a loss, it was a wipeout. She failed to win a single game in the second set against a true peer on one of the sport's biggest stages, and 12 months of hard-earned confidence can drain out of a scoreline like that faster than anyone would like to admit. Then came June in Berlin, on grass, where she actually played some of the best tennis of her young career and clawed her way into the semifinals, only to run straight into Noskova again and lose in straight sets a second time. 2 meetings that season, 2 straight set defeats, and if you dig into her career numbers against Czech opponents, specifically, the picture gets even uglier. A record that sat at 1 win against 13 losses, with that single win coming in a lower-tier event final. And that leads to the harder question, the one that starts creeping into every post-match interview, whether the reporter says it out loud or not. What happens when your losses stop looking like bad luck and start looking like an actual pattern? Because that shift changes the entire conversation around a young athlete, and it changed fast. Around Alex, rewind to the spring of this year in Miami, where she stormed to a semifinal out of nowhere and became an overnight global story. Her face was suddenly everywhere, sponsors started circling, and back home, she went from promising athlete to full-blown national figure in barely a week and a half. And that is exactly when a particular phrase started attaching itself to her name in the coverage. The idea that she was a flash in the pan, a media moment, a player whose fame had sprinted years ahead of her actual results. And if you looked at her resume, as it stood that spring, the imbalance was obvious. Plenty of wins over ranked opponents, plenty of highlight reel moments circulating online, and 0 career singles titles, not one. And it was not only her personal ledger sitting empty, it was her entire country's in the full history of the WTA Tour dating back to 1970. No player from the Philippines, man or woman, had ever lifted a tour-level trophy. So every single time Alex got close, she was not just carrying her own career forward, she was carrying the weight of 115 million people who had never once gotten to witness that moment happen. That is not ordinary competitive pressure. That is closer to an inherited debt, and there's a very specific kind of exhaustion that comes with carrying that. The same headlines rolling out after every tournament, the same conversation rehashed after every early exit, the same unspoken question underneath every interview: when is it actually going to happen for you? And for 3 straight years, she genuinely did not have an answer. Not because her game was not good enough, but because the results kept telling the same frustrating story again and again. She could hang with absolutely anybody for a set. She could beat top-ranked players on a good day. But the instant a real trophy came into view, something in the wiring seemed to slip. And if you had gathered a room full of tennis analysts in early summer and told them that within roughly 2 months Alex would be selling out a 10,000-seat stadium in Canada as an actual champion, you would have been met with polite, disbelieving silence. But 6 months removed from that brutal night in Melbourne, she walked out onto center court at Wimbledon to face the defending champion, and absolutely nobody gave her a realistic shot. If you have never experienced center court in person, it is smaller than you would expect from television, and somehow heavier at the same time, packed with roughly 14,000 spectators who fall almost completely silent between points, grass trimmed to a precise, exacting length, a scoreboard that feels understated compared to the weight of what happens beneath it, everything about that arena quietly reminding you it has hosted far better players than you, and will continue hosting them long after you are gone. On the other side of the net stood the reigning champion, a ruthless frontrunner who almost never surrenders a set once she has claimed control of it, and Alex had never advanced past the second round of any Grand Slam in her career up to that point. Yet this year, she fought her way through 2 earlier rounds and suddenly found herself on the court she had once called her dream stage. facing a champion in round 3. And this is where the story actually turns. The opening set simply refused to end, both players holding serve relentlessly until it spilled into a tiebreak, and even the tiebreak refused to resolve itself normally. Set point saved, then saved again, back and forth, well past the usual finish line of 7 points, stretching all the way to 11 points to 9. And if you know tennis scoring, a first player to 7 should decide a tiebreak, unless it reaches deuce territory, so a break or stretching that far only happens when neither competitor is willing to blink, and this time it tipped in favor of the player everyone had written off before the match even began. She followed that marathon opener by closing out the second set comfortably, and just like that, Alex became the first player from the Philippines in history to reach the second week of a Grand Slam, doing it on the single biggest court in the sport with the entire tennis world tuned in. And if your takeaway from that result is simply that she beat a champion, you are missing the actual headline, because beating elite players was never really her problem. She had already knocked off an Olympic gold medalist and multiple top 10 opponents over the previous year. The real story is the assumption that Wimbledon quietly dismantled for years. Plenty of smart tennis minds had labeled her an inconsistent talent, brilliant for a set, then fading, and that framing was simply wrong. This was never actually about consistency, it was about closing. Look at the pattern laid out across the whole season. A set won by a landslide in Melbourne followed by collapse. A hard-fought run to semi-final in Berlin followed by a shutdown. Over and over, the unraveling never happened at the start of matches. It happened right after she took the lead. The issue was never locating her best tennis. The issue was what happened inside her head once the finish line actually came into view. Think of a distance runner who controls a race for the first 3 quarters and then gets caught right at the final turn. You would never say that runner lacks raw speed. She clearly has more speed than whoever is catching her. What she is missing is the specific skill of running while fully aware she is about to win. And that particular skill almost never shows up in a highlight reel. So what genuinely shifted on that grass court in London was not some mechanical tweak to her forehand. It was that she took a 2-set lead against a defending champion, felt the tension of a marathon tiebreak tightening around her, and this time refused to let it slip away. Then she walked out for the second set and dominated it convincingly. She did not merely survive her lead, she extended it, and that is the real turning point buried inside that famous scoreline. And in the aftermath, speaking with real emotion, she reflected on how many times she had pictured a moment exactly like that, and admitted that when chances like that finally arrive, you simply have to seize them, because even being on that court at all is something to be grateful for. And then she turned her attention to the crowd specifically, crediting the atmosphere they created as part of what carried her through. And that detail is easy to skim past, but do not skim past it, because that was the exact moment the noise of a crowd stopped being a source of pressure, and instead became a genuine weapon in her favor. And if that theory holds up, then whatever came immediately after Wimbledon should not look like a series of one-off upsets. It should look like something else entirely, a pattern. And the evidence backing that up is almost ridiculous. In Washington the following week, she opened by beating an Olympic gold medalist, then defeated the tournament's defending champion, then took down the second seed in straight sets by the exact same scoreline she had used against that same player back in Berlin, then dispatched a 4-time Grand Slam champion in the semi-final for matches, an Olympic champion, a defending title holder, a top seed, and a major winner. That is not simply a good week. That is a systematic demolition of an entire draw. And then came the final, which might be the single clearest piece of evidence for everything building up to that point, facing the world number 3 and top seed. She dropped the opening set. Then rain interrupted play, with her opponent holding the lead in the second set, forcing the match to resume an entire day later. Now apply the old pattern to that exact scenario. A set down, momentum sitting with the other player, an overnight pause spent alone processing the biggest match of her career, with an entire nation still waiting on a